American factories produced 750,000 sewing machines per year during the 1870s, priced from $30 to $50 each. When the sewing machine became widespread, changes in quilt making also became evident. Machine stitching appeared in piecing, quilting, applique, and in the binding. Designer Ellen Benjamin Wilson appeared on his sewing machine. Now he perfected the double-pointed shuttle to form a locking stitch. And he also patented the four-motion feed, which improved the feeding of cloth through the machine. Now it's used on almost every home sewing machine today. His complete sewing manual features the quilter, which came with the machine. If you lost it, it could be replaced for 25 cents. Instructions say to move the quilter out from the needle for a wide space between and in for a narrow space. Now you could also bind your quilt by using a special foot like this one, available in a number of different sizes. Machine quilting has been with us a long time. Today I want you to meet my friend Cynthia Martin, an expert machine quilter. Hi Cynthia, I'm glad you could come today. So what did you bring to show us?
Well, I think I've brought a couple things that you've not seen before.
Ooh, good. This is beautiful.
Thank you. This is a white-on-white quilt that I made for my husband for Christmas, and he really, really loves this one. It's got quite a bit of detail in it. For instance, here it's got some grid quilting, and then over here I have sewn around each one of the motifs.
The bird, the lovebirds,
Definitely. And then there's some echo quilting here and some really fine detailed clamshell here.
That is fine, boy.
And then right in here, there's some really tight stippling.
So this is so beautiful and so much stitching. How long did it take you to do it?
It only took me 60 hours.
You say, only 60 hours. That's a lot.
Well, if I would hand quilt this quilt, it probably would take me about 3 months.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And did you work on it a little each day, or how did you get it done?
It took me about 6 days to do the whole thing.
Oh my gosh, that is great, and it's so beautiful.
It turned out really nice. My husband adores it.
Hearts, I can see why. Hearts and lovebirds all over it.
Well, let's toss this one away, and we'll take a look at this one.
Ooh.
This one is applique in a day.
And I know it took you a day.
It took me a little bit more than a day.
Well,
with all the detail in it. This particular quilt, I did some outline stitching around each of the motifs. We did stippling in all the white areas. And then I even did some feathers in here.
Now, did you draw the feathers on there, or how did you do that?
Yes, I drew the feathers on with a stencil, and a little later we're going to show you how to do that.
Oh, we need to learn that. Can't wait.
And I'm sure you recognize this one.
Single Irish chain, yes.
Yeah, this is a real basic quilt with some moderately advanced detail in it. It's got some stitch through the chain here, and then the borders are stitched in the ditch. And then here, we've got a feathered wreath.
Now that looks like something we need to learn too, the feathered wreath. So are you going to show that to us?
We're going to do that later on.
Okay, great.
Okay, and this last one, this one was done by Sheila. She works for Quilt in a Day.
Pine tree.
And in this one, we've got some stitch in the ditch, and then there's some outline stitching. And then in the opening areas around all the pine trees, there's some stippling. And then it works right into this neat motif. And right at the edge here, we've got some stitch in the ditch again, and then the borders have stippling in them.
And that's really great in the reproduction fabrics.
It's really nice.
Really. Now, I always thought that when I found a top that was hand stitched, or a block, say an applique block or a piece block, that I should finish it by hand. But the thing is, I know that I'll never get it done. So I think machine quilting is okay. Now this is actually a block that I found. This is from the 1860s to 1880s. That's a hand applique block, and I added reproduction fabrics around it, and that grid quilting is done by machine, and I just love it. Just like any other hand quilted quilt, it's just great. So let's move all of this stuff around and get to work. I finished my Nana's Garden quilt top, so we can go ahead and mark it and get it ready for some machine quilting. So what do you think, Cynthia?
Oh, I really like it.
Ooh, thanks. I do too. Now, did you pick out a stencil to fit in these background squares?
I sure did. This one's continuous line, and it's going to fit perfectly.
Now, I also like this one because it has a set of instructions that tells you exactly how to stitch it and in what order to do the stitching. Ooh, this is going to work great. Now, it fits right in this square, nice coverage right in there, and I'm going to use this fine point marking pencil and just drop the lead right into the slots and actually mark it exactly as I'm going to stitch it in just a minute. Now, what are you going to use, Cynthia?
I'm just going to use this silver marking pencil, but you know, Elle, if you make a mistake, you can always use the fabric eraser.
How did you know I was going to need the fabric eraser? You're probably right.
Well, why don't you go ahead and mark the rest of those on that side, and I'm going to show the audience a couple other stencils. This particular stencil is a heart stencil, and you'll notice that it is continuous line, and one way that you could figure out if it was a continuous line is by tracing it with your finger. Now, the reason we didn't use this particular stencil was because it's just a little bit too large for the area. Another stencil that we looked at was this one. This one is, again, a continuous line stencil, and if you'll notice, it ends up at the beginning, but again, it was just a little bit too large.
Now, this is marked really well. You can see it on the light background. Works good on this quilt, but Cynthia, what are you going to do with that dark background quilt?
Well, I have two techniques to show you.
All right, let's see.
The first technique I'd like to show you is called Ponce. It's a chalk-filled bag, and what you're going to do is you're simply going to pounce
That's
right on the area.
Just pounce that in there.
And then when you're done covering the stencil, if you pull it away, you'll see that you have a good
perfect.
mark.
Good. Now, because that's just can brush away, you really need to just work on one area at a time.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you don't have Ponce, you could use cornstarch, and if you put it inside of a muslin bag, you do the same technique and you get the same effect.
Now, that's a good idea. Something you have right in your kitchen.
Another thing that you could use is a soapstone pencil, and in this technique you do it just like you did with your pencil, drawing inside the open areas. One nice thing about the soapstone is that it actually will wash away with a little bit of water on a washcloth.
Now let me see that one.
Okay.
Okay, so that one's nice and light too. Okay. Cynthia, we have to get to work. Get this marked. And then we'll lay out a big table and get our layering done. We're placing a 4x6 piece of particle board on top of the sewing table so we can just lay out this whole quilt. Now this is our backing, and it's placed so that the right side is down, and we're just pulling it actually and just on opposite sides and holding it in place with some binder clamps or some binder clips, just like that. Now Cynthia, when we spread this out, should we pull it real tight?
No, you want to go ahead and not tighten it.
Okay, so now you can clamp on both sides, and just in case your quilt is smaller than your tabletop, you can do what Cynthia's doing.
Just tape this right down on the end here, and if your quilt is really small, you can go ahead and tape down all four corners.
Like a baby quilt, just right on top of the table. Now this is 100% cotton now. What about a sheet?
Wouldn't want to use a sheet because the weave of the two fabrics is different.
And like on a king size quilt, you often have seams, so the seams should run
With the length of the quilt.
okay, like right down the middle or down the two sides.
That's right.
Okay, how about some batting next? Cotton, my favorite. Ooh, 100% cotton, and it's been needle punched so that whenever you launder it, then it doesn't fall apart. Actually, how close do you have to quilt this batting, Cynthia?
This is about 10 inches apart.
So that's a lot. Actually, you don't have to quilt it so close. Okay, smooth it out. No clamping.
Right. No
And
clamping.
on top next comes the quilt top, and we're just going to place this so that it's right side up. It's been pressed. Okay, and then this time, once again, we're just going to smooth it. Ooh, that yardstick is pretty handy stuff there.
Sure is.
Just smooth it, but not stretch it. We're not going to clamp it one more time. Just let the backing hold on to it. And now we need to look at some different battings. We have the cotton, but you have some other choices.
I sure do. This first one here is polyester batting. You can sew this about 12 inches apart.
That's a lot.
It sure is. And it's completely washable. This one is the cotton batting, the same as what we're using in this quilt. You can stitch this up to 10 inches apart, and it has about a 3% shrinkage.
So you have that antique look once you launder the quilt.
That's right. And this last one is wool batting. This is probably my favorite. You have to stitch it about 3 inches apart, and it's treated so that it prevents it from shrinking.
So you can launder the wool batting then.
That's right.
That's good. Now, how thick is the polyester batting that you have here?
This is a 6-ounce weight batting, but it's only 48 inches wide.
So if it were 96 inches wide, it would be called a 12-ounce batting.
That's right.
That has always been confusing to me, but that's a good weight. Now you can go ahead and roll this one fairly tight.
That's right, but if you went over 12 ounces, it would be too much to go through the neck of the machine, so you want to be careful about that.
Okay, so let's get some pins here. Looking good. You're catching all those strings around here.
These are nickel-plated safety pins. They are 1 inch. You need to put it into a container that's sealable so that they don't rust.
Like this one's a good one.
This one is also a nickel-plated safety pin, but I think I like it a little bit better. It's a little easier to put in the quilt and to close.
Different shape.
And then this is one thing I want to show you. This is a little packet of desiccant that comes inside, like shoes or vitamins or whatever, and what it does is it reduces the amount of humidity that's inside your pin box, so when it's closed, your pins don't rust.
And they won't rust in the quilt.
That's right.
Especially living so close to the beach as we do. Now we've got to make sure this quilt is just square on top of the batting and the backing.
That's right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 16-inch square up and we're going to put it right in the corner, and then we're going to adjust the corners so that the lines are straight.
That looks good too. Square in the corners. Now I also like to just look down the side, look at my borders and make sure that they're also straight, because you can do a little pushing and a little pulling. Make sure they're straight before you pin them.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to start pinning along the borders here.
Okay.
To secure the corners. Now you would go ahead and do the 16-inch square up in all 4 corners before you pin and make sure everything's nice and flat.
Make it perfect, sure. And just put them so that the pins are running with the border, running parallel with that border seam. That's good.
That's
okay,
right.
now when we machine quilt this, we're going to have a couple of choices.
That's right.
First of all, we're going to do free motion machine quilting inside the background square. But then we'll want to do some stitch in the ditch or stitch in the chain along here. And we could go down both sides right along here, or we could just go in the center of them, or we could go on all 3. So what do you think? Which one?
Well, I think that we should go just down either side.
Okay, so down either side. So if we take the pinning tool and the pins, just push the pin in, and when it comes out, catch that tip and close it. Now, how far apart should I put these pins?
Just about every 3 to 4 inches.
Okay. And what if we had a king-size quilt here? How many pins do we need?
Oh, somewhere between 600 and 1,000 pins for a king-size quilt.
And how long would that take? That would take a lot of patience.
Oh, it sure
more
would.
than anything.
About 2 hours to pin, and if you had 2 people, it'd be less.
Get the whole thing quilted.
Now,
All
I
right.
pin just a little bit different, though, than you do. I was noticing that you hold the quick clip and pin as you go. I pin, put the pins in, and then I come back and I close all the pins.
Different techniques.
Just a different
Whatever
technique.
works.
That's right.
So as soon as we're done pinning, we're going to remove the clamps and then just roll it on the diagonal in towards the center, and we'll hold it with some special clips. We finished pinning our quilt, and then we rolled it on the diagonal into the center from both sides. Then we secured it with those special quilt clips. You can see how it's holding that cotton tightly so that it'll fit right into the arm of the sewing machine. And Cynthia, finally, we can sew.
Yahoo! I guess now I need to talk about some of the tools that you're going to need in order to do some machine quilting. The first tool I'm going to talk about is the walking foot. This is what it looks like. What it does is it evenly feeds the fabric, the 3 layers of the quilt, through the machine all evenly at one pace. And the arm that I'm moving up and down actually has to go over the needle bar. And I'm going to go ahead and put that on for you.
Now you should check your machine because if it doesn't work quite right, maybe you don't have that bar over your needle arm.
That's right.
Sometimes that happens.
It sure does. And that'll really mess up your quilting.
Now, since we're machine quilting Nana's Garden, the best thread right now to use would be the invisible thread because we're sewing over from one color to the next. We're changing colors of thread all the time.
Okay, the problem with some monofilaments is they're a little bit too heavy, and what you're going to be looking for is whether they break easily, and I'm going to show you this one. This one breaks really difficult, so it's kind of like on the line of fishing line, so we don't want to use that one.
We could catch a bass with that one.
We sure could. This is more like what you want. It comes on a spool like this, and if you can see that, it's almost like a hair, and if I pull on that, it breaks really easily.
Great.
So that's what we want to use.
But we actually have some nice dark thread in there so everybody can see it, and the tension is all set and ready to go.
Sure is. Some things that you're going to want to know about thread is that we don't want to use any of those dime store varieties, 10 for $1.
No, no 4 for $1.
Yeah.
Show them what a balanced tension should look like.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this picture here. This is what balanced tension looks like. The upper thread and the lower thread is balanced. It meets in the middle, right inside the batting. If I slide my finger down here, this is unbalanced, and it's showing the upper loop right at the top of the fabric, which pulls the bottom loop up to the top as well. So what you need to do here is actually lower the tension. On the next one down, you'll see that the bottom loop is actually pulling to the bottom of the quilt, and the upper loop is also pulling to the bottom, which means that you need to increase the tension.
All right. Can you just throw that quilt around now?
I sure will. Let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this quilt and I'm going to put it over the top of my shoulder, and then I'm going to take the fabric and I'm going to make an accordion right in my lap, just like this. Now, if you had a rather large quilt, you may have to do several accordions right in your lap.
It's a warm, cozy day when you machine
Oh,
quilt.
yes.
Okay, stitches per inch you have set at
3.5.
Okay, that's a nice long length.
Okay.
Your walking foot's in place.
And then the next thing that we're going to do before we even start is we're actually going to drop that thread right down inside the fabric, just like that. We're going to pull it away just so that you can see that. If you can see this here, I've actually pulled the bobbin thread right up to the surface. So I have now both the top and the bottom at the top, so I can hang on to that as I sew.
Okay, so the bobbin thread is the same color as the backing.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and lock those stitches in place.
Okay, back and forth.
That's right. about 3 times, and then I'm going to just continue sewing right down that line.
Okay, now it helps to have that flat bed on your sewing machine.
That's
and
right.
you've got your hands in
Kind of a triangular shape.
and you're checking, making sure there's no puckers pinned underneath.
That's right.
You
So everything
spread
is
it apart.
smooth.
Okay, good. Now Cynthia is securing the quilt, and this is a diagram to show you exactly what she's doing. She's starting right here at number 1, and she's stitching down one side of the chain in that direction, and then as soon as she's done, she's going to pull it back up to right to the second side of the chain and go back down. Once it's secured in that angle, then she'll go over here to 2, stitch down both sides at the diagonal, and then just keep on moving right down this side to 3, to 4, to 5. And then when she gets down to the bottom, she's going to turn it around and start coming up until she comes the whole way across the bottom and then back across this side. Ooh, sounds good.
Don't forget, at every turn we need to unroll the quilt and readjust the clamps.
We have a lot of work to do, Cynthia.
We sure do.
Well, as soon as we finish stitching this, anchoring it down, then we're going to go back and show you how to do some free motion machine quilting around the motif. To free motion machine quilt, you need to either cover your feed dogs or drop your feed dogs, and there are a variety of tools that you can use as well. Now, Cynthia, your dogs are down.
They sure are. This is a darning spring. This spring can be used on many machines, even a featherweight, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to put it on a sewing machine. So I'm going to take it over here. It needs to slide right straight up the needle, and it needs to go then over the needle bar. Now, it needs to thread on the outside of that spring, so you can't use your needle threader, unfortunately.
Oh, at my age, I need my needle threader. That's the only way that I get it done. Now, if you were going to be using a featherweight and a darning spring, you could just go ahead and take a business card and tape it right over your feed dogs. Just make a little hole for the needle, huh?
That's right.
Perfect. Ooh, gardening gloves for Nana's garden. Now, what are you going to do with those?
These gardening gloves help provide traction when you're quilting. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull that bobbin thread right up to the top. I'm going to drop the needle in and bring it back up, and I'm going to bring that bobbin loop up to the surface and use my stiletto to bring it up, just like that. And then I'm going to move those threads off to the side and hang on to them, and then I'm going to lock the stitches. What I'm going to be doing is going back in the same hole and doing a side-to-side motion, which locks the stitches in place. If you have a needle down position, this is the time to use it. And I'm just going to keep going right around that motif.
And you want to cut those threads.
Okay, well
so
let's
they
go ahead.
don't get right in the way.
Which is a good reason to have that needle down position.
Okay, there you go. Top
Okay.
button.
And we'll go ahead and trim those away with gardening gloves on.
Yeah, because if you have bobbin thread trailing along behind, that can really make a mess and get you twisted and tangled as you're working with that.
That's right. Now, as far as speed is concerned, you want to make your machine go at a moderate speed, not too fast, not too slow. That's what creates the different stitch lengths.
And now, with your feed dogs dropped, you can move your quilt to sideways. You move it to one side, to the other, backwards, forwards, and always keep the top in the top position.
That's right.
Ooh, how's it coming?
Oh, it's coming. We got
good.
almost one half of it done
Oh,
here.
great. Well, practice makes perfect. And Patty was certainly practicing on her fancy flowers. She took the fan, she did a little fan right here, and she did an outline stitch 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fan, and she used just a white thread on the white background. And then right here, she did another stitch in the ditch technique. And then as a practice, in this floral print right here, she used monofilament thread and just free motion machine quilted right around that flower. And actually, with that free motion quilting, it has a trapunto or raised effect in the flower. So practice does make perfect. So how you coming with that?
Well, we're almost there.
Okay.
And when we get to the end, we're going to do another locking stitch. So we're going to bring it back to the very beginning. And we're going to do that same motion as we did before, forwards, backwards, about 3 times. We're going to raise that needle up to the surface, pull it away, and then we're going to use the stiletto again to bring that bobbin thread up to the surface.
Okay, and just pull it up and cut those threads.
That's right.
Well, that motif was fun, but I hear that feathers are even more fun. So I can't wait for feathers and more finishing techniques.